Hello, everyone. My name is Francesco Cipollone, Frank for Friends. I'm the CEO and founder of Phoenix Security, but today I'm here with a different hat. We are, with Phoenix and few other community from OWASP and all across the industry, putting together a vulnerability management framework across application, cloud security, and traditional infrastructure security to help organization and practitioner get ahead of the curve and start maturing in their practices across the board, from discovery to triage to remediation. And the vulnerability management framework is an open source collaborative effort of the industry to do so. This webinar series is focused on various elements of the framework. In today, we'll focus on aggregation, that is fundamentally the ability to take problems from different data sources, centralize them in one place, aggregate them, contextualize them, and deduplicate the issue. There are so many ways to do so, both open source, non-open source, commercial, and we will cover the methodology and method and the idea behind this practice. Before we jump into topics, I would like to do a quick recap of the vulnerability management framework, the areas that we're going to cover. We cover fundamentally the discovery part, and now we're moving towards the prioritization part, that is fundamentally the area of aggregating problems all in one single place and then start prioritizing them based on what information are available. We're going to cover the prioritization in the next cycle of webinars, while today we're going to cover the aggregation. The full framework, the version 1.2 right now available, is available at phoenix.security/vulnerability management framework and covers all these areas. So today we're going to cover the aggregation, asset management, and deduplication. We're going to focus on these parts because it's easier to read, and hopefully you can read the screen quite well. In a process of previous video, we described the detection of issues, asset, and asset management, where organization can discover problems in various stages. Now, the framework is divided in 5 elements plus a maturity level 0, divided between M0, M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5. M0 is fundamentally the practice of not doing anything around this area, while M5 is the highest maturity, where in this particular area is fundamentally aggregating all the problems in one single place, deduplicating, declaring new elements in one single place, and using contextual information. We're going to analyze each single step, and let's start from maturity level 1, when at the basic level, you would, as an organization, as a vulnerability management practice or application security practice, aggregate vulnerability in one single storage and place and location, and ideally normalize the vulnerability information across different data sources. There are open source projects that do that and enable you to do that. There are products like ElkStack or Grafana that enable you to visualize and aggregate vulnerability in one single place, or you could use CSV or Excel and Google Sheets to even start massaging data and deciding what data point. That is the lowest maturity level, where you fundamentally have just a data lake of security information all in one single place. It doesn't provide you insights, but at least provides you a normalized approach on vulnerability, and you have all the problem in one single place. You don't need to access different dashboards, and you could potentially create dashboard of your own. Now, the real power comes between the maturity level 2 and maturity level 3, where you start fundamentally cleaning up the data in a manual or non-manual way, in a more automated way, where you start identifying artifacts and vulnerability from the same problem. From a deduplication perspective, that's quite a complex process, especially if done manually, because you'll need to identify which assets have problems and if two assets have the same information. The challenge is vulnerability scanner usually approach the problem from a different perspective. You might have, from an infrastructure perspective, a scanner that scans information from inside a virtual machine or a host, while you might have another scanner that scans the same problem and vulnerability from an external perspective, scanning an IP address from an external perspective or in a DMZ or internally. And so you basically have different perspective of the same problem. So aggregating and contextualizing this vulnerability information can be challenging sometimes because different scanners have different viewpoint and perspective, and you might have fragmented information source across the board. And you might need to have some methodology and relationship description to actually aggregate and link problem up together. For example, if you have a scanner that detects vulnerability from an external perspective and a scanner that detects vulnerability in the host system, you might have an internal IP address and an external IP address available that you can correlate together using, for example, firewall rules or NAT rules at your perimeter edge. Now, this is a form of deduplication. The other form of deduplication is if you have the same host and different scanner reporting the same information, you might want to remove certain vulnerability from one place. In more mature, advanced version of the maturity level, you might start looking at more powerful way to deduplicate information. Specifically in open source library, you might want to flag false positive, or you might want to deduplicate information or remove vulnerability altogether for libraries that are not being used in your code. In this particular case, you might want to need and look at fundamentally pieces of your code and which function your code calls, and if that function is being used somewhere. You also might want to deduplicate or remove vulnerability from repositories that are not being anymore used or hosts that are not being anymore used and may be reported. And also you might want to deduplicate information or remove information from hosts that do not exist anymore. If you have container system and ephemeral service, you might have information around container image, and you might have a lot of container image in your register of container images, but only one of them might be active. So you might want to look at vulnerability and deduplicate and remove fundamentally vulnerability from different image and container. And this is where we go in maturity level 4 and 5, where we deduplicate in a more powerful way. Maturity level 4 is where we look at a bit more of a contextual aspect, hence look at, for example, a container environment and looking at which image that container environment is actually using, and then relating that to the container registry and looking at which image is not anymore being used. Or in the particular case of libraries, looking at different vulnerability sources and information and looking at which library is being used where and which system is using that particular functional library. In the last element of maturity, you probably want to look and glue up different perspective of different vulnerability information, specifically if you have information coming to your system from an external perspective and information coming to your system from an internal perspective. You might need and have the information across the board to actually link and glue these data sources together from different scanners, specifically internal IP address and external IP address, or functions in a specific library, open source library, and function in your code. You might need additional intelligence that look deep in your code, look deep in the connection between different IP addresses logically in your environment. And sometimes this information are not immediately available. In order to do an advanced report and removing fundamentally these nodes and deduplicate this vulnerability, it's usually advised to use an automated system, because doing this manually can be extremely time consuming and it's prone to error. There are different methods, and open source versus non-open source and commercial system like Phoenix Security that does this at scale and enable you to do this at scale by providing additional intelligence and information. You might also want to consider at this stage also to aggregate elements like assets, container, and cloud images into what can be considered an environment, because enable also you to focus on what's more important. You might have elements that you want to deduplicate in an environment that is called production, that is customer facing, versus an environment that is called non-production, that is maybe not customer facing. Now, you might want to do a better job of deduplication in a production environment, because that's where the vulnerability appears and need to be addressed first. Maybe you want to deprioritize some non-production environment. You can do that as well from a software perspective, where you look at production versus non-production application, or you might want to look at business critical application made by software, website, API, and non-business critical application. I hope this was useful. As always, we are continuously evolving the vulnerability management frameworks. Today, we analyze the aggregation, asset management, and contextualization area of the vulnerability management framework. We explored the various areas of the vulnerability management framework, and specifically, we focus on the various levels of maturity for aggregation and deduplication, from maturity 0 to maturity 5, and the various methods. In the next video, we're going to focus on how to prioritize vulnerabilities. I hope this was useful. If you want to know more on the vulnerability management framework, there is an open source OWASP project, open worldwide application security framework. And if you want to know more, visit the link in the comments or visit phoenix.security/vulnerability management framework. I hope this was useful. This is Francesco, your host. Stay safe and stay mature. Bye.
Phoenix. Fix vulnerabilities today before attackers exploit them tomorrow.